Well, hello, hello,
Hello, hello. Happy Wednesday from Los Angeles.
and happy Thursday from Sydney.
So, we are here on episode 16 already. So, super excited. So, I'll hand it over to you to start us off, Leanne.
Well, today is an interesting day for me because this particular topic is one that I find fascinating. It's all about neuroplasticity and habits. And today we're going to really have a look at the neuroscience, as usual, of these habits. But the neuroplasticity is the part that I find very, very, very interesting. So, hello, I'm Leanne.
And I'm Jason. And this is Let's Talk.
Yeah, this is a space where no topic is off limits. We're going to cover all sorts of topics from well-being to resilience, leadership, money, relationships, mindset, and so much more.
And as always, here at Let's Talk, we bring different perspectives, real life stories, as you know, and honest conversations. Because the things that we often don't talk about are really the things that end up being the most important to talk about.
Yeah. So our goal here is simple. We really want to just spark new ideas, shift mindsets, and give you practical tools that you can use in your leadership, but more importantly, in your whole life.
Yeah. So whether you're tuning in today for some inspiration, some personal growth, professional growth, or just a fresh perspective, let's talk.
Let's talk. So this series is called The Neuroscience of Being Human. And just to give you a bit of a recap, in our first episode, we talked about how your brain shapes everything you do, literally everything you do. And then last week, we explored this whole idea of the EQ advantage, the emotional intelligence and how our awareness and self awareness creates choices. And in those choices, we have agency over our lives.
And today we're going to talk about what happens next in this series of the neuroscience of being human, and that is change. Because, like Leanne said, your brain shapes everything that you do, right? Um, and once you understand your brain and also understand your emotions, the next question is, can I actually rewire my brain? And the simple answer is yes. And this is where neuroplasticity comes in. And we're super excited about today's conversation. So I will turn it over to Leanne to give us a little bit of background on neuroplasticity.
Yeah, so let's make it a little bit simple, right? Because it can be quite a complex topic. But neuroplasticity is basically the brain's ability to change itself, right? Its structure, its wiring, and how it shows up based on your experiences. And it's our ability to be able to create new habits, to do things differently. They used to say back in the day, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But the fact is, that is exactly what you can do. Our brain is designed to create new wiring all the time, to make simple things habitual in order to give you um, space, really. So you don't have to kind of think about absolutely everything that you do. So when we talk about this whole idea of neuroplasticity, we're really looking at how can we consciously create what we think, what we feel, what we shape, what we do. Because neuroplasticity really is the idea that we can create these new pathways in our brain at any particular time. And there's a fantastic book, we're going to speak to it at the end, but it's basically talks about how they are able to create sight in blind people by pressuring tongues and doing all sorts of incredible things. So I just wanted to speak to that because it's really important that we know that we can actually change. We have the capacity to do so. So let's kind of do a bit of a double click on this. So one of the things that we know is that neurons that wire together. It's Hebb's law. And what this means is that if we do things with emotion over and over again, right, it becomes a structure in the brain. It keeps happening. So if we have positive emotion with this particular experience, then we have this positive perspective in the brain. If we have a negative experience or a negative emotion with something, then we're going to keep recreating that. So our neurons do consistently fire, they connect, they create new pathways. And what then creates habits is this repeating of these things, right? So you might have, for instance, you brush your teeth in a particular way and, at a certain time. That's a habit that you've created based on this repeated pattern. So when we do something over and over again, these pathways become like super highways, basically. So when you try something new, it feels hard because we're kind of resisting our existing wiring to create new wiring. But once you focus your attention and energy on the new wiring and you repeat that consistently, that becomes the superhighway. And the old wiring never really disappears, it's always there, but it becomes the goat track. And to give you an example of that in my own personal life, when I was a smoker, I then became a non smoker. But then when I went through a divorce and I was stressed out, my old wiring of, oh shit, I need a cigarette came up instantly. Now, I didn't necessarily go and buy the cigarettes, but it was fascinating to me that that was the wiring that had been there for such a long period of time. Stress, cigarette connection, right? So the two things wired together. So every time I got stressed, I'd want to have a cigarette. Now I don't smoke cigarettes anymore, and I've been able to kick that. And now I have new wiring. So when I'm stressed, I meditate. Like that's what I've created. But it took a shite load of effort and repetition to create that new wiring and strengthen those new pathways. Because what we do, our brain's designed to automate everything. And the reason it automates everything is to conserve its resources. Like we know that the brain is small compared to the rest of our body, but it uses most of our resources, glucose, oxygen, the whole lot. So in order for us to function at our best, our brain's natural process is to hardwire everything that it can. It's why when you first learn how to drive a stick shift or a manual car, as we call it in Australia, you'd be focusing on the steering, looking at the rear vision mirror, having to remember to press the clutch and change the gears and do all of these things. And it felt enormous, right? Almost impossible. Now you can do all of that and talk on the phone and eat something simultaneously because it's hardwired. So our brain isn't fixed at all. It does evolve consistently and it's constantly adapting to what you repeatedly think, what you repeatedly do, and what you repeatedly feel. We become addicted almost to the consistency, to the habits that we've created. And they're so unconscious that we don't even see that we're doing it anymore. Like it's just become part of us. But I just want to say again, it's what our brain is designed to do, which I think is interesting because we often think that creating new habits is hard. And it is in the beginning, but with repetition, it becomes really, really easy.
Yeah, and kind of a like a visual that comes up for me, Leanne, when you were talking about that is like the hamster wheel, right? And like it's almost like creating these new hamster wheels that you'll be the little hamster kind of running on automatically, subconsciously. And so yeah, there's those old hardwirings that you want to kind of almost make secondary, but they're still kind of there in the background, like with your analogy of stress cigarette.
Yeah.
But I think, for those people who are visual, I think, picture like creating new hamster wheels for yourself. And not impossible, but does take a little, does take a little work and conditioning, like going to the gym, right?
If I can just double click on that, Jason, because something you said there I think is really important. It's why sometimes also when we are trying to create new things, like whether it's a new behavior that I wanted to produce or a new thing I'm trying to learn or a new skill I'm trying to master, under a stress state, we will naturally go back to our very old wiring because it's been there longer. And
Yeah.
it's why you might be trying to, be this new version of yourself, which is empowered and powerful and wonderful and all of that sort of stuff. But then something stressful occurs in the environment, and all of a sudden we're reacting the way we used to. And that's not necessarily the way we choose to act, but the old wiring is there.
Yeah.
And so we can't deconstruct the old wiring, unfortunately. You can't get rid of it. Like once it's there, it's there. But we can stop using it and redirect to the new wiring and make that the super highway. And eventually that will become more habitual than the old, but it's always there.
Yeah. And I think that's where like the power of self-awareness comes in, right? Of being self-aware of like, oh, I'm defaulting back to like a unhealthy hardwiring. So that self-awareness can kind of be um that what's what I'm looking for, like
It's almost
I guess
like
that awareness.
it's like an
Yeah.
alarm system. Oops, I'm there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like the fire alarm that's like, oops, don't go back there, inch back forward, to your new habit.
But also
So,
then self-compassion, I think, needs to come
yes.
in, because we're trying really hard, and sometimes we're going to fall back to that old stuff, and being kind to ourselves and going, oh, I'm not a failure. I just reverted back to what was habitual, and I can try
Right.
again. And I think
Yeah.
that is the thing that we need to be mindful of for ourselves and for others, quite frankly. So compassion for self, very much so, but also empathy and compassion for others, because we often will, judge people. Oh, look, they said they were going to change and they've reverted back to their old behavior. Well, yeah, but they are trying, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take energy, and it's going to take consistency. So
Yeah.
patience and compassion, I think, is necessary when we're trying to create new things.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think like when people are trying to change careers, right? They're trying to change from, okay, this was my safe career, I made good money, good benefits, but really wasn't passionate about it, and trying to move into what actually really will make them feel fulfilled. And there's going to be a lot of stumbles and a lot of hiccups and reverting back to old habits and behavior. And I think that self-compassion and self-forgiveness is like key, because it's like, okay, you know what? Fell down, get back up, brush yourself off, and just make steps forward. So which brings me to say that habits aren't personality, they're actual like pathways. And with any type of pathway, they can be strengthened or weakened. And it's that strengthened part, right? That it's like the visual of just kind of going to if you're just getting back to the gym, and you know, yeah, I mean, where you start today from 6 months, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year is going to be totally different. Um, so just remember that habits aren't personality, they're pathways, and those pathways can be strengthened or weakened.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's a shame we can't just delete them. Some of them anyway.
exactly.
But
Can't, hasn't technology just, hasn't it developed that yet?
unfortunately not. Habits are largely, in the part of our brain called the basal ganglia, and it's the brain's efficiency center. It's also where a lot of our emotion comes in. And when we're trying to shift a habit or create a new habit, let's talk about doing both. There's three parts to it, that we can talk about. And there's a great book by Charles Duhigg, again, a resource at the back of this podcast today. But he talks about the habit formation loop or the reward loop. And usually what tends to happen is that there's a cue, like something happens, then there's my behavior, and then there's the reward at the end. And he talks about it by way of a cookie, right? He wanted to lose weight, but he noticed that at 3 o'clock every day he would get up from his desk, he would go up to the 11th floor and he would buy a cookie, and he was putting on weight. And he had a child's wedding and he was trying to lose weight. And this habit kept happening. So what he chose to do is try and have a look at the three different parts. He tried to modify the cue. So the cue was 3 o'clock. So he was like, okay, well, what if I get up at 2 o'clock? Or what if I get up at 4 o'clock? Will that change the routine and the reward? Which it didn't. He then looked at the routine. So, okay, I can't necessarily, the cue's not the issue. Let's have a look at the reward. The reward or the routine. The routine is that I get up and I go to the 11th floor, right? And I buy the cookie and then I eat it. So he had a look at that and he tried to do other things. He ended up, getting up and going to have a glass of water and doing other things instead. But that still wasn't actually creating a new habit for him. So then he looked at what's the reward. And initially he thought it was the sweet of the cookie, but it actually wasn't. The actual reward was the social interaction that he received when he went up to the 11th floor, because everybody else was up there and he'd have a bit of a chat as he was eating the cookie and then go back to his desk. So then he decided to modify it and go, okay, well, at 3 o'clock, I'll still get up and I'll still go up to the 11th floor. However, instead of eating the cookie, I'll just get social, chat to people, and then go back to my desk. So he was still being rewarded because the reward was good, but he didn't need the cookie anymore and he was able to lose the weight. So we need to look at what's the reward we're actually getting. And the reason I want to double click on the reward piece is because there's always a payoff. Habits started, even if they're bad habits now and they don't no longer serve us, they started with good intent and there's always a reward of something. People will go, no, there's no reward, in smoking. Like, I just want to give up. It's killing me. It's not good for my health. Well, the reward could be the deep breathing that you do. The reward could be the social interaction outside. The reward could be getting some sunshine and fresh air, in the middle of your day and building up your serotonin levels, right? The feel good chemicals. So we need to kind of have a look at what's the actual reward that I'm receiving. And the new habit that I want to build has to have a reward that's equal to or even better than the reward that I'm already receiving. So I think I just wanted to highlight that because we often assume that habits are bad and there is no reward, but there always is. And if we need to create a new habit, we've got to think about what's the reward equal to value or even better than, because it kind of reinforces our dopamine receptors in the brain. Like, we get that feel good chemical and we like it, even if it is eating a bad cookie, right? It makes us feel good. So what can I do that's still going to make me feel as good as that or even better? That gives me those that dopamine hit, but it doesn't necessarily pile on the calories because it's no longer the cookie. So we need the feel good chemicals. I mean, we're driven by that at the end of the day. We like the chemical concoction that we're getting, and we can actually choose different either cues. Like, can I change or modify the cue? Can I actually go somewhere else instead of there? The routine, or alternatively, the reward, because the brain loves efficiency, as I said earlier, and it hardwires everything it can. And it does that with positive emotion very well. So if we can find a good reward that's positive, it'll be easier and quicker to build the new wiring that we're trying to build.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Leeanne, when you were talking about like all that and just kind of reflecting back on myself, like when I used to work internally, full time, right? And thinking about kind of those instances of like where like I got those spaces of dopamine, right? Because of whatever reward I was seeking or receiving in that moment. So it kind of makes me reflect on, was a habit a good habit? Was the routine a good routine or was it a not good routine? So it's good reflection points to kind of think back, right? But then also think in the present, like kind of throughout your day, where are you feeling rewards and receiving rewards, but what's the routine and the habit that's attached to that?
Yeah. What's triggering it? What's the cue? What's the routine? And then, is it actually benefiting me, or is it just not really benefiting me, but I'm getting a feel good chemical?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, with that, our habits really exist to conserve energy, because right, like our brain is currently asking us, like, how can I automate this? Like, how can I make this easier for myself? It's not saying, hey, Jason, hey, Leanne, let's do more work. It's looking, how can I keep you safe? How can I keep you protected? Um, how can we automate this? So if you have that frame of thinking that your habits are there are to conserve energy, but your brain is actually working to say, how, like, now how can I automate this, right? And and thinking through that, why, like, right, like, why do bad habits stick, right? Even if it's a bad habit, smoking, for example, um it's safe. It gave you the rewards you were seeking at the time, like the sunshine and the interaction, etc. So it's like the bad habits stick because they're comfort. They're that comfort zone. um
Yeah.
and
And
like,
there's a reward.
yeah,
And there's
yeah.
a reward, right? Like it's comfortable. I know it. It's habitual and there's a reward.
Well, right, because I mean, like, you think, right, like when people, like when they go out, right, like on the weekends, and they may go dancing or they may go out having drinks with friends. I mean, yeah, is alcohol good for you? No. But what's the reward that people are getting, right? They're getting that social interaction, in a space where you can just, like, be like, like, you don't have to feel like you're at work or being judged by colleagues and all that kind of stuff. You're also listening to good music. You're having great conversations, and if you get tired of this, bar or pub, then you just hop to the next one. Um, so there's that reward, and it's the reward that people are seeking, even if the habit is bad. um, and and I think that's why also science has shown us, or neuroscience has shown us, that good habits feel hard initially because you're having to work. Your brain's having to work. It's out of your comfort zone. It's out of your um, default. Okay, I'm safe. I don't have to worry. But then, like we talked a little earlier, is that those good habits then are the new hamster wheels that get rewired, and they're hardwired. And then, hopefully the not so good habits kind of go on the back burner of the stove. And yes, there will be times that there's that default, right? But it's, if you really lean into your awareness, you can see that alarm that comes up. And not saying that people won't default even if they see the alarm, right? But it's just those little steps that just help you to become so much more aware of, when you're building and strengthening this new habit and this new hamster wheel, that when you do tend to default because of whatever, right, stress, trigger, etc., as long as you have that increased self-awareness to at least give you that, like, beeping alarm, um, whether you go back or forward, that's what's important.
Yeah. If I can just jump in here, Jason, because
Yeah.
there's a particular model that I think is really useful. It's called the trans-theoretical model of change. Try saying that fast 3 times. Anyway, and it was a model that was originally formulated for addicts, right? Because addicts
Mm-hmm.
get the reward of, what they're doing, but they want to stop because it's screwing up every other part of their lives. And even though they're committed to trying to, kick the habit of whatever their addiction might be, they will often fall off the wagon. And oftentimes it's 7 to 10 times before they have a permanent exit, right? So this model speaks to, instead of beating yourself up and going, oh shit, I reverted back, I went back to my old behavior, actually celebrate it, because each time you kind of fall off the wagon and get back on, you're getting closer to the permanent exit. So when I'm coaching people who are trying to create new habits, and they come in and they went, oh, I did that thing again. And I'm like, great, we're almost at the next one, right? Like that's okay. So we started at 7, we're now 6, like, so you can actually even change your languaging and change your perception about that, because it's expected that we're going to default to fall back. Any habit that we might have, because let's face it, habits can be addictive regardless of whether there's actually an addiction present. But if we can celebrate the fact of, oh shit, I fell off and I got back on, yay, instead of, oh shit, I fell off and I'm a failure. And that's when people generally give up trying, because they've fallen off the wagon a couple of times and gone, it's too hard, I can't do it. As opposed to, I've fallen off, woohoo, I'm getting closer to the permanent exit. So there's, we can really shift the way that we navigate the reverting back, because we are still bouncing forward at some point, so long as we don't give up.
Yeah. Well, and that's why the neuroscience has shown us that repetition matters more than intensity, because the brain doesn't care whether whatever habit is currently in place or is being formed is helpful or harmful. It really, all what it cares about is that it's repeated, so that it remembers, and then it becomes automated. Right. So and that's where I think a lot of I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine about who's older in technology, right? And I was telling her about this episode, and it's like, oh, I just don't repeat whatever technology entity that I'm trying to learn on my phone enough for it to become hardwired, because it's, whether it's like you get distracted doing other things, or it just feels too hard, or you're just not in the mood to do it. But it's those little wins. If you just keep inching forward, it's going to become an automated habit.
Good process. It's not one and done, that's for sure.
No,
it's not one and done.
No, it's just, it's just like, even when like we started, let's talk, right? It started off with a conversation, both of us wanted to do this, and now it's a new habit, that we do it weekly, and we have our routine. And there was some work at the beginning to like, okay, like, where are we going to schedule this in? We're on 2 different continents, but once you get through those difficult parts and those and almost kind of put in streamlined processes, for something like what we're doing, it now just feels like automatic. It's like, okay, yep, Wednesday's here, we're doing the podcast, and whatever day we do our planning. So anything is possible, but just remember that your brain, all it cares about is that you repeat it. You repeat it, even if it's small little repeats. Then you're moving to really changing your brain to then change your life.
Because our brain is plastic, we can adapt it and change at any time. What comes up for me is you often hear people going, well, this is the way I am, right? I can't change, I've been like this my whole life. Well, yes, you have, and you've got choices, right? But it takes work and effort. So you can't sit there and go, oh, well, this is just the way it is, and it's the way it's always been, it's the way it's always going to be. Well, if you believe that, that's the truth for you. But if you believe that you can change, and you have a bit of a growth mindset, and you're willing to experiment and to fail forward and give things a go, and fall off the wagon a few times and pick yourself back up and get back on and keep trying and repeating, you can create anything you want. And I think that's liberating, right? We're not trapped in our processes and in our habits that no longer serve us. We have choice, we've got agency, but it takes a little bit of effort. And that's the hard part, but it's a little bit of effort for a short period of time until it becomes habitual, and then you never have to think about it again, and it just happens.
Yeah. Like, I find that, especially when people are thinking about going back to school, right? And like, I'm in my final year already of my doctorate. And it's just like, how did that happen? Like, because it's like you stress and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to fit this in my schedule? How am I going to do homework? The whole thing. And then it's like, it just, because you're repeating every week, with going to class and doing homework and writing papers and et cetera, it just becomes, I mean, not saying it's not hard work, but the showing up part, that's what it's the easy part in some ways, right? Because it's like, okay, yeah, my class is on this day and this week and from this time to this time. And, you kind of see how classes are designed, kind of like this week is going to be really heavy. This is going to be a lighter week, et cetera. So, it's these like micro habits within the big habit, right? That just, with that slow repetition, it just becomes, and then before you know it, you're like in your final year,
And
so
the thing I find interesting about that, Jason, is that when you finish, you'll look back and go, what did I used to do before I was doing this? Because this has become such a habit. Then all of a sudden you've got this space and it's like,
right.
what used to be there? Like, I don't know, like really. So it's quite interesting. I find that, just how quickly we can adapt really, um,
Yeah,
if we want to.
absolutely. So with that, if habits are wiring, then why do people rely on motivation? It's because we confuse emotion with structure. And, some entities, and, fill in here as you see fit, Leeanne, too, is that willpower lives, here in this prefrontal cortex, the fussy part of the brain, the doesn't have long attention spans, and et cetera, et cetera. So
It gets shut down under pressure, like all of these limitations, the limitations of our prefrontal cortex.
yeah, exactly. And then, it's energy hungry. And it shuts down easy under stress, right? Um, and that's where also habits are subcortical, if I pronounce that right, which means automatic.
Yeah. And habits are actually in the back part of the brain. I say back, but they're in the subcortex. No, I can't say it either.
Subcortical.
Whereas, yeah, willpower is in the front part, which is our working
Yeah.
memory, which is very resource um, taxing and
Hmm.
can quite easily fall by the wayside.
Yeah.
Whereas when something becomes hardwired, it kind of moves from the prefrontal cortex to our unconscious, basically, and it
Yeah.
becomes a part of us. We don't have to think about it, whereas willpower we have to think about. Whereas habits we don't think about; they just happen. So it's different structures in different parts of the brain.
Yeah. And, that's when we were talking a little bit earlier, right? Like when you have a new goal or a new initiative or something, or like a new habit that you want to build. I mean, that's why this part up here just, you need that willpower to like muster through it and build that habit and build those muscles so that then it can move back into the subconscious and relax a little bit.
Yeah.
you know like um like you don't have to feel like you're lifting weights all the time at the gym, right? Where you can just go have a nice walk on the treadmill. And not saying that that can't be taxing as well sometimes, but it's easier than, right, like, okay, I've got to go do bench presses, and then, my trainer's up in the weights and et cetera, et cetera. So, you know that's why it starts here, like Leanne said, and then it moves back here to where it can relax and just become subconscious and automatic.
Yeah. Or other than conscious is another way I like to put it. Because willpower basically uses the weaker structure in the brain. Like if you think about it like that, like it's a good thing and it gets us motivated and it gets us started. And you need a little bit of oomph, right? You need a little bit of willpower to start the ball rolling. But long term, it's not sustainable. We actually want to be able to move from willpower to automation in order to conserve the resources and the energy in our brain. And so we can show up at the best way that we can, right? And what we automate, what we hardwire into ourselves is almost effortless. Whereas thinking about willpower is effortful, right? Like you really have to kind of grind. Whereas once something is internalized, it's effortless. We can do it without thinking, without conscious awareness. It just kind of happens. And if we think about this, a lot of our habits happen outside of our conscious awareness. You know, something happens, we react. And if we think about it, we react the same way every time because, as you said earlier, neurons that wire together. So when X happens, I do Y. If we think about our conversation last week in emotional intelligence, that's part of that as well. You know, when something happens, if I get triggered by an event or something occurs, I'm going to react this way. That's the habitual kind of loop that I've got, unless with awareness, I can kick in and try doing something different. And willpower starts, but it can't take you there long term. Sorry, Jason.
Oh, no. You know, when you were talking about the emotional response, right? You know, it makes me think, you know, because it's habitual, right? Like if A happens, I respond this way, right? Which may or may not have emotional intelligence or emotional maturity within it, etc. So it kind of made me think about real quickly, you know, like in leadership, right? Like when leaders, you know, how they lead, and are they leaders that lead with emotional intelligence, with emotional maturity, so that like if a situation happens, you know, whether it's a decision or a team dynamic or whatever, if blank happens, I respond this way as a leader. And you know, it just made me think about like, oh, you know, there's many leaders who have negative emotional responses when A happens. But then there's those leaders who have really leaned into and worked on their level of emotional intelligence and self-awareness and emotional maturity, that if A happens, a whole different response happens than, you know, someone who is like a fear-based leader or a you know, a directive leadership. You know, not saying that directive leadership is never good, because like when the pandemic happened, there was a lot of directive leadership that needed to be in place. And there were those leaders who, even within their directive leadership, responded with emotional intelligence, and many that didn't either. So I just wanted to just kind of put that in there, from like a leadership standpoint.
Yeah. Because we have a choice, you know, how we show up, how we impact others. All of that is habitual in us. And if you're not getting the outcomes that you want, then you've got the opportunity with neuroplasticity to actually rewire how you react and you respond. And I think that's so liberating as leaders. And as we always say, we're leaders all the time, even if you don't have a team
Yeah.
or working below you. We lead ourselves, we're leaders in our family, our communities. So we really want to make sure that we're showing up at our best and we can shift things because our brain is designed to do that. Like it is designed to make connections, hardwire what it can, and automate processes. And with a little bit of effort, that happens. So discipline really isn't the issue. It's a design flaw, right?
Yeah.
What we've actually put in is garbage in, garbage out almost, and
Yeah.
it's very much the same. If we wanted to have a good output, we've got to put good input in. And we can do that consciously with choice and repetition to get the outcomes that we want to get. And
Yeah.
with effort, with effort.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, that goes to show, right? Like those leaders leading within organizations, whether big corporation, small, medium, large nonprofit, what have you, is that those leaders who are open to coaching, you know, part of the open to coaching, they may not even know it, but they're open to changing their habits.
Yeah.
And so, And I think in today's very, very complex, volatile, contemporary, etc., business world that we live in, um, you know, I think it's good that leaders who are open to coaching, um, seek it out. Or, if they're a leader that needs permission from their higher ups to get a coach, I think that's awesome because we are going to need leaders who are willing to change their habits, because you just can't lead the way we used to.
Command and control no longer works.
Yeah.
People will, rebel against that. So we do need to change. And given the rapid and rate of change in our world, even over the next 10 years, like it's going to be unrecognizable to the way we're working today, really, with AI and all the different things that are coming into it. Almost feels like you get whiplash, like you've just learned something and there's something new. So the ability to be able to be supported,
Mhm.
make the changes that you need to is really useful. And the other thing that coaching offers, which I think is really interesting, and we haven't kind of spoken about it, but especially around habit formation, because we need to have reward, coaching gives you that. Like you can actually, the coach will cheer you
Mhm.
on, they'll work with you, but there's also the accountability piece. Like you've got to answer to somebody, and that in itself will keep you in momentum. Even if
Yeah.
willpower falls off, right? Because we said willpower can be weak. Knowing that I've got to then answer to somebody is going to potentially give me the kick up the butt that I need to
Mhm.
continue to repeat, repeat, repeat until it does get hardwired.
Yeah. Because if you have a good coach, they will be that, bring this back up into the top of your inbox,
Yeah.
that extra level of accountability, um, for the newness that you're trying to create in your life, which is hard because it's all working up here at the moment.
Spaghetti soup up here. Yeah.
Exactly. Um, so Leanne, do you want to talk about how to rewire habits intentionally?
Yeah. And intentionally is the word, right? So, what I want to say about this is don't make them too big. Sometimes we want to change everything and then wonder why we can't because there is so much. So small changes are powerful because they feel safe to the nervous system, and you can lean into that. So, start with something small. Like, it might be instead of I'm going to go to the gym for an hour every week, maybe start with 5 minutes of movement every day and then kind of build up to 10 and 15 and 20, but start with something small so you can be rewarded because it's the reward that will keep us motivated. That dopamine hit is the signal to the brain to do more of something, right? So,
Mhm.
it's small things and reward yourself for them. It could be instead of meditating, for 30 minutes twice a day, which, that's what we should be doing apparently. Start with 2 minutes of intentional pausing twice a day and then build on that. So, rather than changing everything about the way we are, small micro habits. And again, there's a resource at the back of this about that. James Clear, Tiny Habits, I think, is his book.
Mhm.
There's Atomic Habits, there's Tiny Habits, there's The Power of Habit. There's so many books on this space, and they're all really good. I might not necessarily be able to shift my whole state all the time, but I can actually find at least one or two things to be grateful for every day, which will then shift the rest of my state. See balloons because I'm grateful. you know, I might not be able to move myself from, near bankruptcy to financial abundance quickly, but I can do a financial check-in once a week. So these little things, these actions, tiny actions repeated, um, give us the abundant results, which is really interesting. It's not massive changes that we need to do. It's small changes done on repeat that creates better outcomes.
Yeah, and the next step is, so as Leanne was talking earlier, the cue, the routine, and the reward. So the next part is to change the cue. So it's not just the behavior. You got to change that beginning step. So if you want to change the routine, you have to shift the trigger. And so some things that you can do within that is put your phone outside your bedroom. I mean, we're married to our phones all day long. You don't have to sleep with it too. Like, put it out, on the kitchen counter, or so that actually builds a new habit for you to like get up out of bed in the morning instead of lay in bed scrolling, right? Journal beside your bed, right? Also calendar blocks. I read this great quote on a friend's Facebook post that said, just a couple days ago, that said, schedule in your fun like you schedule in your like meetings. Do schedule in your fun first, then schedule in your meetings. Because if you do it the opposite way, there's very little left. So, I mean, that's a change in habit too, right? Is, oh my God, to actually schedule in my fun first before like all my meetings. So, it was just a shift for me in that moment when I was reading it. So, those are some helpful examples um to changing up the cue, not just changing up the behavior.
Yeah.
Phone outside your bedroom, journal beside your bed, and calendar blocks.
I love that idea of factoring in the fun first. I remember reading a book years ago called The Richest Man in Babylon around finances. And one of the things that it said was pay yourself first. So most people will pay their bills and then try and save. But the idea was save first and then pay your bills, right? So that
Mhm.
slight shift actually allowed for, I tried it, I thought I'm going to give this a go. And it worked because if I paid my bills first and then saved, there was nothing left. But if I chose to put money aside first and then pay my bills, I still had money left at the end. I don't know how, but it was magic. But those it was magic. But those subtle shifts, if we can change the cue, the way what gets triggered, and then change the behavior, the outcomes are going to be completely different. So I love that. And the other part of it is that we've got to change our identity because habits stick when it reinforces our identity, and human beings will do everything they can to maintain our identity. So we sometimes need to shift what our identity is. So instead of, and our languaging makes a big difference. So instead of saying, I'm going to try and exercise every day, we change that to, I am somebody who honors my body. Actually, that's part of my identity. I am somebody who has financial freedom. That's part of my identity rather than I'm going to save a little bit. Um, so shifting our language so we've got coherence between our identity and our behavior is going to really, turn the dial up because we will do everything we can to meet our identity. And if our identity is something that's not healthy, then we're going to continue doing that. Whereas if we can shift our languaging and our identity to, I am somebody who, um, then the brain finds the coherence it needs and our identity shifts as well as our habits and our behavior.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm.
um Pay yourself first and pay your bills. um which sometimes I do that, but I don't have a consistent habit around that, so it'll be interesting to like put more effort towards this to see the result over here.
Yeah.
So with that, um what equals wiring, right? It's repetition, like we talked about earlier. Your brain loves repetition, plus the emotion equals the wiring. So in essence, what that is saying is that emotion speeds forward, accelerates neuroplasticity. So with that, what are some things you could do, right? Celebrate the small wins. Everyone thinks of like, oh, okay, the end result is going to be this. This is when we're going to celebrate. But why not celebrate along the way, right? Because then you're you're wiring along the way versus just, oh, we have to wait until, July 1st to celebrate because that's going to be, when the big grand prize is. Yeah, it may be when the big grand prize is, but why not celebrate along the way to make yourself feel good, um, to increase that neuroplasticity as you're going along. Feel the pride, you know, feel good, you know. You don't always have to um, look at the deliberative side. you know and I think, you know like that's also what makes up good teams, right? Is having a little bit of each, like those who are deliberative, those who, yep, we're going to celebrate the small wins, to everything that falls in between. So feel the pride, feel good, because I mean, who doesn't want to feel good, right? I mean, feeling I mean, yeah, you have to feel those feelings when you're sad or on the other side of the teeter totter, but I think most of us would love to be in the state of that feel good, um, most of the time. I mean, I would.
Me too. And I think, I don't know about in America, but in Australia, we have this poor poppy syndrome. Like you can't blow your own trumpet, you can't, be boastful and that sort of stuff. And I think bugger that, like celebrate your wins and actually show up and go, hey, I did this and I'm super proud of it. And if you
Mhm.
can't do that everywhere, find your courage circle that you can do that with.
Yeah,
Like I've got a courage circle of people that I can ring up and go, I'm so excited that I actually managed to work this out or do this or whatever. And then they celebrate with me, and that builds that positive emotion. We all feel proud, we're all kind of elevating together. And it's not about being a wanker about it and go, oh, look at me, I'm so good, I'm better than everyone else. It's like, hey, I'm actually better than where I was yesterday. Like I'm competing with me, not with anybody else. And I'm celebrating the shift in me, or the shift in others if they're sharing that with me. So find your people that you can do that with. It's so important. And allow
yeah,
yourself to feel the feels of feeling good. We don't always have to be the downer or looking at what we have done wrong or what still needs to be fixed. That's all going to be there. What you focus on grows. So focus on the good and then the good will grow.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think another part to add in here is kindness and gratitude. I mean, like there's actually been studies out there that show that these two can actually help shift the rewiring of your brain. And I think we're, from a real life, what's happening out in the world at the moment, like we need more gratitude, we need more kindness, we need, as we said, celebrate the small wins, feel pride, um, and to anchor positive emotion to your behavior, um, because we're going to get so much further with the new habits and et ceteras if we instill those components.
Yeah. And as a
So
leader, if I can just add something to
yeah,
that here,
absolutely.
if you're working with somebody and you're trying to get them to instill a new habit in the workplace, the more you acknowledge the good behavior, the more they're going to want to do that because they want the acknowledgement because of that positive reinforcement, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
the saying is you get more bees with honey than a stick. But in truth, if we acknowledge somebody for a good work and what they've done, it's a trigger to their brain to do more of that good work, right?
Yeah.
Because of the positive reinforcement, because of the dopamine, because of the reward circuitry that our brain thrives on. So, as leaders, even as parents, right? Don't focus on what the behavior you don't want your kids to do. Focus on the good stuff and then reinforce that because then they'll do more of that. It's the same with adults. We're no different. So I just wanted to kind of add that in.
Yeah. And a question to you, Leeanne, is so if someone feels stuck in patterns, what do they do?
Yeah, well, they need to remember firstly that it's not because they can't change, it's because their pathways are strong. They've been repeating this behavior for a very long period of time. And they can shift that. They can start focusing on something new. Um, Something small, something that's rewarding, something that's more rewarding than the reward that they're currently getting. But just even remembering that it's not that I can't do this. Yeah, it's hard, but I've been doing this for a long period of time. Like I've been running this pattern for 50 something years, right? It's going to take a minute for the new stuff to come in. And that self-compassion is really, I think, the key to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Self-compassion, which I guess incorporates self-patience.
Like a hot minute, right? It's going to
Well,
take a
I
hot
mean,
minute.
yeah, you know, like a 50-year pattern or 50-year habit, it takes more than just trying to do the new habit you're trying to form and the new hamster wheel you're trying to perform or create in a week. I mean, it just doesn't.
And the other thing is celebrate where you fall off the wagon and get back on because,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it's it's effort that we want to celebrate, right? Not just the outcome. And if we're trying and then we fall back and then we try again, we're still moving forward. And I think that's really important too.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so with that amazing conversation we just had, we want to move to our weekly top 3 tips from today's conversation, along with books and resources. Okay, so our top 3 takeaways, tips for this week are one, your brain is always rewiring. Whether it's intentional or unintentional, it's always in the process of rewiring, whether it's a good habit, bad habit, etc. Um, so we want you just to be aware of that, and I
Intentional.
think that
Sorry. And intentional, aware and intentional.
yes, exactly, absolutely, absolutely. It was so funny because I was actually just going to use the word awareness. Our brains think alike, Leanne. And our second tip is do small, repeated behaviors that will help shape your identity over time. It's those small steps, and celebrate those small steps. Celebrate the behavior behind it, and because it will help to reshape your identity over time. And thirdly, change isn't about intensity, it's about consistency. So that's why we have like that visual of the water, that consistent, that's consistent stream out of the faucet or out of the pitcher that you're pouring it versus like just dumping it out. Is that just and I think one thing here for people who don't have a lot of patience, that consistency sometimes can feel like a lifetime.
Yeah.
Because no, I want the new thing right now. But I think that's where this whole arena of self-awareness comes in. And then, and maybe that's the new habit that you need to build, right? Is patience. And that's going to take a minute too. To especially if you've lived in a pattern of not being a patient person. So those are our 3 top tips for this week. Hopefully you will find them helpful and digestible so that you can take them with you and just even if you want to journal about them or have a conversation about them with another person, or even interact with us on our YouTube channel on them as well.
My girlfriends and I have a saying whenever we're trying to create something new, and and we just look at each other and laugh and go, "It's a process." It's a process. Like, and it just gives you that space. Like, it's not going to happen overnight. It's a process. Um,
Yeah.
and I find that very useful, just as a reminder. So, consistently, it's a process. Yeah.
Yeah. Because sometimes you do feel like you're the only one going through whatever you're trying to change. But, I think if you have like you said like that courage circle, Leanne, that you can go to and just have honest, open conversations, you really find this like, oh, I'm not really the only one. And, and you can give those helpful reminders like, yeah, this is a process and it takes patience and diligence and all the et ceteras.
Yeah.
So shall we move to the resources?
Yeah, let's do that. So we've got a few books, and I've mentioned a few already throughout this talk because there are so many books around this space of habit and neuroplasticity. But the three main ones that I want to talk about is The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge. This is a fantastic book. It blew my mind when I first read it, around how they can, like I said, put a pressure point on somebody's tongue and create different visual pathways to give people sight. Phantom limbs that, still feel pain even though they're not there, and, using mirrors to release the pain. Like, there are so many things that this book shows us that we can shift our brain. It talks about neuroplasticity in such an easy way, but with case studies and medical research. So great book. Great, great book. The next one is Atomic Habits by James Clear. And, there's also another one called Tiny Habits, which is a fantastic book, but it's just books to help you with habit formation, where we can create micro habits, small habits that have a profound impact. So I highly recommend that one as well. And also Tiny Habits. They're both great books. And The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. This kind of talks about that habit formation loop that we were talking about, with the cue, the reward, the cue, the behavior, and the reward. So this one kind of helps you to shift any one of those three things. Can I shift the cue? Can I shift the behavior? Can I shift the reward in order to create new habits? There's also a really cute YouTube video on this one about the cookie that you can find, but I just didn't find the link to put it in here for today. The other one is Carol Dweck. She also has great books, but this particular TED Talk is really about using growth mindset to create new things in your world, right? If you believe you can improve, you can, with effort and repetition. So these are the resources that we're recommending, and we will put the link in for that TED Talk into our onto YouTube so you can look for it.
Yeah, Leanne, are these three books also on Audible, to your knowledge?
I'm almost 100% certain that they are.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're
So
good storytelling, but also they pack a punch. So, if they're worth it.
yes.
Yeah.
That building the library of resources and books. I have so many waiting in my queue to start listening to. But anyways, next week, can't believe we're already on episode 17. And episode 17 is going to be on the social brain, wired for connection, which will be next week, Wednesday, February 25th, here in LA, 2:30 p.m. And streaming live Thursday, February 26th, Sydney at 9:30 a.m. AEDT. So we are excited for next week's conversation and all the good bits that will come from that. And we look forward to you tuning in to next week's episode.
Absolutely. And as we close out on today's episode, I just want you to remember that your future isn't built into dramatic moments. It's built in those repeated micro choices that you make. So until we speak to you again, choose one small habit between now and next week, and then rinse and repeat it. Repeat, repeat, repeat. See what happens.
Exactly. And this is a snapshot of the rest of our series on the neuroscience of being human. And with that, we are closing for today. So, thank you for joining us for today's conversations on habits and neuroplasticity, changing your brain, change your life.
Yeah, we hope you got something out of this today. We hope it sparks something new, an insight, a new perspective, or even a new habit now that you might want to create. Or even just a question that's worth exploring even further now.
Yeah. And as always, our mission here at Let's Talk is simple. It's to have the conversations that matter and to remind you that you don't have to figure out this complex thing called the human life alone. We are here to have the conversations beside you and help to give you tips and resources to, go about your day, week, month, year, and that you just find something small that you can take and infuse into your life.
Yeah. So if you enjoyed today's can't even say the word episode, as always, please share it with a friend, subscribe, like us, and keep the conversation going.
Because when we talk,
We really talk.
and anything is possible
So let's talk
with real conversations.
and limitless possibilities. Thanks, everybody.
See you next week.
See you next week.